This video covers riding on the Cooks River Cycleway from Hurlston Park to Rookwood Cemetery, or if you're coming up from down south, from Earlwood to Rookwood Cemetery. This is about a 10 kilometre section of the path, and we're only going to go in one direction because it's pretty straightforward. You should be able to turn around and do it in reverse without another video. To just give an idea of where this is in Sydney, you can see over here there's a harbour, and over here this green bit in between these two X's is where we're going to go. Now, if you want to know how to get down to the Cooks River via the Greenway, which comes down from the Bay Run up around Leichhardt, Canada Bay, etc., we've got a couple of videos covering that as well, imaginatively named Part 1, Part 2 and Part 3, and we'll put links in here to them as well. I'm not going to show you the entire route because that would turn this into a 25-minute video. Instead, I'm going to show you a few key features that will help you stay on track, as well as the bits to watch out for. Now let's assume you've managed to find your way down to the Greenway and have arrived at Ewan Park. What you'd normally do is turn left here to get onto the path going west, or you'd go over the bridge to head south to the airport. Since the new bridge won't open until November, we have to take a slight detour down the road to get onto the path. No big deal. Now the whole path is 100% shared path, so cyclists have to give way to pedestrians at all time. I find this path to be relatively uncrowded compared to, say, the Bay Run, and the pedestrians here seem to mainly know how to keep left. The path does meander around a bit, so don't bring your time trial bike and expect to set new land speed records. Parts of the path also flood when it's really wet, either from excess water running off the ovals or from the water level in the canal rising so much that it overflows the top of the canal. That's pretty rare, and it really needs to bucket down for a few days in a row for that to happen. There's this small but steep pinch where a bridge crosses the river. Take care on the other side because you'll pick up quite a bit of speed, and you can almost guarantee that there'll be pedestrians, dogs, kids, or all three on the path when you come flying down the other side. So be on the brakes and just be ready. The width and construction standards for the path vary wildly. The path goes through several councils, and it's clear that every stage was overseen by a different engineer with their own ideas about how paths should be constructed. The surface varies from brick to asphalt to pebblecrete to concrete, and sometimes almost a combination of the whole lot. And the width varies from really nice to way too narrow in places, but most of the time it's pretty good. The same goes for the upkeep of the vegetation alongside the path. Some councils keep it really nicely trimmed back, while others let it go to the point where you can sometimes barely see the path. I've seen lizards sunbaking on the path from time to time, and I've had to move a few off the path to prevent them from being squished. Now, I grew up with bobtails, so I'm fine with picking them up and moving them, but if you've never done that, just leave them alone and go around them. If you want to exercise, apart from riding a bike, there's several exercise stations along the path as well. You often see bikes parked there and people doing some chin-ups and things. There's also a number of pedestrian and vehicle bridges across the river to your left, and you'll see paths, parks, gardens, flowers, all sorts of stuff on the other side. My recommendation is you stick to the path on the northern side until you've done it a few times and know it reasonably well before going over a bridge and exploring the other side. It is nice over there. It's well worth visiting some of these little gardens, but the path on the other side, it's not as continuous or straightforward as this side, and I've gotten lost in the suburbs when I've tried doing that. So yeah, just be prepared, just know about that. Blind corners are a problem at quite a few spots due to trees, bridges, tunnels, things like that. It's a good idea to ring your bell on approach. I've gone around one corner and seen some rollerbladers that have had a crash and they've been lying in the middle of the path, so you don't see them until the last moment. Just be prepared to stop. Now for dog owners, most of you riding, probably aren't riding with your dogs, but some people do. There is a dog park next to the path and a very handy drink station where you can fill up your bottle as well. The dog path, of course, attracts dog walkers in this area, but most dogs that you'll see will usually be on a leash, but not always. So again, just watch out for that. There are a few cyclists who like to ride around here with their dogs, and by that I mean, small dogs that are sticking out of a backpack, or they're in a basket on the handlebars. I've even seen them in baby carriers worn on the chest. It's very cute. You will see it. Might give you a bit of a chuckle. When you get to Canterbury Road, be prepared for the worst bit of bicycle infrastructure in Sydney. Now there is a project underway to widen this path, and it should kick off before long, and there'll be detours around this area as well for some time while that's happening. But unless you're really confident with your bike handling skills, I'd suggest you don't try and ride through here, especially if you've got wide handlebars on, say, a hybrid bike. It's all too easy to catch your handlebars in the fence and go over sideways into the concrete wall, and trust me, I've done it, and it hurts a lot. It's also so narrow, if there's someone coming the other way, obviously, not even pedestrians can get past each other. So pull up, have a look through the tunnel before entering, and if there's someone coming the other way, just let them come through first before you try and proceed. After the tunnel, the path does a bit of a wiggle as you prepare to go under a railway bridge. The path also gets narrow here, and there's usually pedestrians, coming across the bridge, etc. So take it easy as you come up this little hill. This bit of path is really, again, one way, so stop if necessary if there's someone coming the other way, and let them clear the path before you proceed. And as you're going under the bridge, make sure you ring your bell, because this is a real blind corner and you don't want to crash into someone coming the other way. Now after this section, there's a lot of mangroves, and the mangroves collect a lot of rubbish that gets washed down the river. You will occasionally see, if you look into the river, these big traps to collect the rubbish. But there is a local environment group called the Mud Crabs, who you'll sometimes see on weekends dragging rubbish out of the mud. Now they use a trailer attached to a bicycle to cart the rubbish away, and if you see them, give them a thumbs up. You do go past quite a few sports grounds along the way, and most of them have public toilets next to the path. But the toilets are only seen to be unlocked when the ovals are being used for training or a game, so don't assume that you're going to be able to find a toilet. I guess if you do get short, at least there's plenty of trees along the path. Now, there's 3 main roads to get across, and each one is set up with one of these horrible zigzag refuges. These are okay if there's just 1 or 2 of you and there is no one coming the other way, but they're really horrible when the path is busy. They're too narrow for people going in opposite directions to pass, so if you see someone coming the other way and they've already started crossing, just stop on your side of the road and let them cross before you try and cross yourself. Stay on the path. Whatever you do, don't go onto the road and wait for them to come out of the zigzag. You don't want to end up in a tangle in the middle of the road with drivers bearing down on you. I have seen the odd cyclist try and go over these concrete things. I don't recommend it, because I've also seen one of them stuff it up and end up on the road. You'll notice that I ducked out early and avoided using the raised crossing at this point. I sometimes do this if the road is quiet and I see a white van parked on the other side of the crossing, because the van completely blocks the sight line to your right. If it's there, the only way to get across safely is to dismount and stick your head out and have a good look. One thing to note is that drivers have right of way at all these crossings. They are no way pedestrian crossings, even though one of them is a raised crossing. It's not a pedestrian crossing. That said, a surprisingly large number of drivers will stop and wave you across. If so, make sure you give them a wave or a nod of thanks in return. But be really careful, because just because the driver is slowing down, it doesn't mean they're actually going to stop and wave you through. They might just be slowing down because there's traffic on the other side of the crossing, and they actually have no intention of stopping for you. They're just trying not to run into a car that's a few metres up the road. Or they might be slowing down just enough to avoid scraping their spoiler on the raised crossing, and they'll run you down if you try and cross. Don't assume anything. On the far side of the raised crossing, you have to ride down a short stretch of road. It's less than 100 metres. This is normally a very quiet street, so don't stress about it if you're with kids or something. But do watch out for cars coming from your right as you come out. Now, I know this sounds absolutely bonkers, but I rode up this incline one day to find a very confused driver following their GPS and trying to drive down the path. And they took quite a bit of convincing before I finally made them understand this was a path and not a road. Now, once you come out of this underpass, the path narrows really considerably, becomes very tight, and there's blind corners, etc. And you've got to be really careful in the blind bends of coming up behind pedestrians or people coming the other way. If someone is coming the other way, you pretty much have to ride in the trees in order to pass safely, or they need to take to the grass. It's a pretty shocking section. Once you get through this, just past the car park, there's another road crossing, this time with no refuge in the middle. It's just a straight across. But stop and have a good look to the left. From here, it's a pretty straightforward run until we get to the Strathfield Golf Course, and it's at that point that the path diverges from the Cooks River. The river goes through the middle of the golf course and we get diverted around the northern side. There is one intersection to really watch out for. Instead of staying on the path, I take this ramp and I duck out onto the road for about 100 metres and then duck back onto the path. That's because the sight lines at the intersection are just terrible and drivers come flying up to this corner in both directions. We used to live just around the corner and I used to walk to the little shopping centre just off to the left here because there was a cafe there. It's since gone broke, unfortunately. And I saw some completely mental driving around here, and I've had a few close calls trying to ride across the intersection. I even had close calls riding from the cafe across the bridge to this intersection with drivers actually overtaking me on the bridge with oncoming traffic. I mean, it's just completely nuts. It's up to you whether you stick to the path or take to the road, but if you do use the path, just watch out, have a really, really good look, and expect to see cars coming from the left way too fast, and I mean way too fast. At this point, some cyclists prefer to stay on the road and avoid having to deal with pedestrians and so forth on the path. The roads are generally pretty quiet and that's not a bad option. The path ends just past this bus stop, and don't make the mistake of taking the road going to the left. That's just a driveway that goes nowhere. Instead, we take to the road, which is usually very quiet, and ride straight up to the G-junction at the end. You'll know you're in the right spot if you see this A-frame church on the other side of the road. Turn left here and go straight through the roundabout. The road curves around to the right, and at the top of the next hill, it's time to get back onto the path. Now the signage here is slightly confusing, that's if you can find it. I always go up this first ramp, which takes you straight to the gap in the sound barriers. Now there is another ramp at the end of the road, but this is the better option, I think. Note that there is a convex mirror above head height. You need to check that to see around the blind corner for people coming the other way. And you really do need to use it because you will see people coming the other way sometimes. Now we'll finish up here at the dead centre of town. Rookwood is worth exploring if you have the time, particularly the old sections to the northeast. If you like gothic stuff, it's really cool. The tracks in some sections are pretty rough and probably best suited to mountain bikes or gravel bikes or just a bike with gravel tyres. Just make sure you don't ride into one of the unmarked drains that crisscross certain areas. They're deep, they're hard to see, so stick to the tracks. The next video will cover how to get from here up to Olympic Park. Now that's going to be a mix of on-road and off-road trails, so this is a good time to turn around if that doesn't interest you. Going back is exactly the reverse of what we did. There's nothing funky about it. The only thing you really need to be careful of is signage can be a bit of a problem. Some of the signs on the road are hidden behind trees. There used to be symbols painted on the road at the intersections, but they've long since faded, or the council's resurfaced the roads and they haven't bothered repainting the symbols. So you've got to watch out for that. That's why things like that A-frame church, I use that as my marker for where I have to turn right, rather than looking for the signage behind the trees. Thanks for watching, and here's a link to a playlist of videos exploring other routes around Sydney.